Good morning. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about the nature of consciousness and unconsciousness, light and darkness, expansion and contraction. These are the singular, the duality forces that seem to rule our universe. So pretty much any form of negativity is coming from a place of darkness or unconsciousness. It is playing out a pattern of some sort that is less desirable. Consciousness will always seek a more desirable solution, whereas unconsciousness and darkness will always cling to what is familiar, often destructive patterns. So basically the way that we become more enlightened and more free and more joyful and better at learning and better at flowing is by tracking down the areas where we contract, where we have darkness. Unpleasant feelings are a great indicator that there's something that needs to be identified and cleared out. And shine sustained consciousness. So basically just like breathe consciousness into it and don't let it run away. It is not us. Our fears are not us. Our darkness is not us. It's an aspect of light and dark of being. This aspect of light and dark of consciousness and unconsciousness and all kinds of patterns that happen on this planet are all pretty much revolved around the ancient love story of our creation of our solar system, which is essentially the sun and the sun mingling with the water planet to give birth to the planets. And so this initial interaction of the sun shining light on a planet that had no light on it before creates our whole existence. As far as we know, the sun shining light on Earth is our whole reality. We know very little outside of this. We know a little bit about what happens when other suns shine light on other planets and lights from other suns, but everything, our whole universe is based on light from sun, light from stars. So this is the light of examination, of illumination, of consciousness. This is like, this is where it all comes from. This is highly condensed, highly complex matter in its largest form that we know of. So the model of planets cycle, so they spin, and so the light hits part of them for part of the time and not for the other part of the time. So relativity says that the sun experiences unending light, the sun is just light, and the planet experiences one half in light and one half in dark, and a rotation, so parts that used to be in the light are then in the darkness. So this forms a metaphor for human consciousness. This is, on a very grand macro scale, which then, has fractals in every aspect of our existence. But part of that is that we all cycle through light and darkness. We experience joy and pleasure, and then we experience pain and difficulty. And the more we recognize that this is just a cycling of our being, that the planet cycles on the sun, and it's not the source of joy disappearing. Joy itself is not leaving us, the same way that the sun does not leave us, the planet. The planet spins around and we experience light and darkness. So when we experience our light and our darkness, we need to remember we're just revolving, and the sun, the light, the love and consciousness is never going anywhere. It's always there. We can always let it in. Even if it appears dark, it's still reflecting through moonlight. There's still other stars in the sky. There's still there's waves of light that are coming around the edge of the atmosphere even when it's dark, so we're still experiencing the sun in tangible, if much more minute ways. So anytime we want to let in more light to our life, we literally allow it in. We don't make it. We don't have to do anything really except for create the space, allow it. So every single breakthrough I've ever had has come from submitting and letting go of who I thought I was and letting go of identity and just allowing. We're taught so much to fight, but really all we have to do is allow, and not other people to have power over us, but allow our power over ourselves to become really clear so we can allow greater things to happen to us. We are insignificant, and the more we can allow great things to happen to us, the better we become, and the more familiar we are with having great things happen to us and allowing great things to happen to us and learning from that experience. So I don't think about the things I'm going to say. I don't plan them or write them out at all. I am immersed in this world of contemplation all of the time, from all of my life, pretty much that I can remember. So all of this is just kind of what makes sense to me. It's all just the patterns that I see, and I love just kind of diving in and seeing, like learning as I'm exploring these things. It's just such a cathartic process for me to be sharing what I know and examining. Perhaps the fact that I'm explaining this to other people is allowing me to examine it in a slightly different way, so I'll reach slightly different insights. And basically, my goal is just to figure out where I can let more consciousness into my life, and it's been a really exciting practice of doing this because I realize that everything is about consciousness. I can apply this to every aspect of my life. Everything that seems to follow a pattern, work or school or social relations or hobbies, basically can be infused with more consciousness and have more ability and more awareness within that. So it's not even so much being good at something as having more consciousness in it. For example, singing and chanting was not something I was ever good at. My voice cracked easily. I didn't have a whole 2 octaves easily accessible. But I decided at a certain point that I just really wanted to. And so here and there I would just start practicing. And then eventually I got this routine down where I'd just practice singing in the car pretty regularly anytime I went on a long trip. And then it just got to the point where I was just doing it all the time. And I was like, oh, driving means singing, and driving means a little bit of chanting. And it eventually worked its way up to just realizing how potent it was. Once I hit kind of a critical mass of consciousness within my singing and my chanting, it took on a new form. So it was almost like I did it enough that I became more conscious of it and what I was doing, and I could see the minute changes. And then I realized that it's not about the amount of time practiced, it's the quality of practice. So really giving it 5 minutes of my all every day is way better than 2 hours of meaningless. So I want to touch briefly on the fact what meditation is. So meditation is generally the expansion of consciousness, and its expansion of consciousness is supported by higher brain functioning. Higher brain waves, theta waves are ideal. And so anything that can get us into the state is really what we're looking for. And meditation, as it's taught to the Western mind, or as is interpreted, or however that translation process happens, I think it's all lost in translation. I think this is common in all cultures, but especially when it comes from the East to the West, that meditation is thought of as a mind game. And meditation is absolutely not a mind game. Meditation has nothing to do with thoughts or feelings. If anything, meditation is the opposite of thoughts and feelings. Meditation is what happens when we're not having thoughts or feelings. It's a beautiful, delicious thing. So I think that most of the Buddhist practices, not Buddhism itself, but most people who practice Buddhism in the West are still working with mind games. They've been taught these mind games that help them break down their mind. The goal is to try to release the mind into meditation, but I don't think that people make it past the first hurdle. I haven't experienced talking with anybody in this area or meeting anybody or hearing of any workshops or programs from anybody who's broken outside of the cycle of it's a mind game. So everybody's about defeating their mind and saying, if I think hard enough, I'll have beaten my mind. And I've just experienced these 20, 30, 40-year Buddhist veterans of the West who want to fight, who want to dominate, and their whole reality is about dominating the mind, dominating their mind, dominating other people's minds. It's all about domination in the mind. There's no meditation at all. So this is the danger of using a philosophy as spirituality, because Buddhism is very clear that it's a philosophy. There's a spiritual component to Buddhism if it's embodied, but it's not implicit. There's nothing about the Buddhist practice that says it's spiritual. And I think that is, people in the West love that because they're like, oh, I don't actually have to be spiritual or meditate. That stuff is beneath me. That's hippie nonsense. I can just go straight to the real stuff, the psychology, the mind games. So it's really important to just let go of mind games and say, oh, I looked at a tree blowing in the breeze today and I relaxed into that feeling for 2 minutes. I got theta waves for a couple minutes. This other guy who's going to meditation class every day and forcing himself to meditate for an hour or two a day and always seems kind of aggro and trying to control people around him, he's probably never experienced meditation before. He's never consciously been aware when he slipped into a meditative state. So it's really important to be aware of the traps. Basically, I've been calling them false ascension matrices. So these are belief systems that pretend to allow us to ascend and expand our consciousness, but are basically finite traps that allow us to pretend. And they're often encouraged. Like, people who don't want us to reach higher states of consciousness and awareness and bliss and creativity and support and connection will encourage these kind of mind traps and try to build them up as much as possible. So another thing I want to touch on really quickly is, as we have awakenings should be a continual process that doesn't end. That's the whole point. It's not just, I had an awakening, I'm awake now. That doesn't exist. People might wake up for a moment and then fall back asleep, I think is what most often happens. But partial awakening. So when we awaken to the fact that we have a first and a second chakra, that we have identity and survival needs and relation and ways of getting our needs met through relation, that is considered a partial awakening, because the third chakra is personal power. So as soon as we become active in our third chakra, conscious in our third chakra, we seek to have power over our needs and power over our relation. We want to control the words that come up out of our mouths. We want to control how we allow ourselves to indulge in feeling. We can allow a feeling to be experienced and pass through us, but we want to choose which feelings we're indulging and choosing to repeat. So this is all about personal power. So partial awakening to the reptilian mind, as people call them, dragons or reptiles, this is when we awaken to the power of identity and the power of relation, but not the power over self, not the power of containing our thoughts and our feelings so that we have heart space, so that we can be directed into higher states of consciousness through our heart. So partial awakening, a lizard awakening, reptile brain, these people are often very psychopathic. They often seek to cause other people's suffering at their benefit. They often have a grand delusion that the whole world is so simple that they are the only ones who can see through to clarity, and they see anyone who doesn't see their reality as just being beneath them, being a slave, not worth their time, a person to manipulate. They see the whole world as a playground to manipulate people into doing what they want. So this is a very partial awakening, because they haven't reached the state where they can even conceptualize the fact that being is all one, that consciousness is its own state of matter, if you want to put it that way, its own state of energy. Consciousness is a very infinite universal principle that inhabits other things. It inhabits matter, so it is not a law of the universe the way we kind of try to track it down. Similar to gravity, we don't comprehend gravity. We comprehend there are beings on this planet that have anti-gravity, and that's how we comprehend gravity. We don't see it as a universal force like we do the other forces. We actually don't see how the universe works at all. We just have these tiny little pieces that Einstein came up with that we're kind of clinging to, and he was like, no, don't cling to these. These are very partial and temporary. So we really have very little clue on how the universe works unless we're trying to interpret these ancient texts that have talked about the nature of the universe. So the Rig Veda, originally all the ancient Hindu texts, all the ancient texts from all around the world are all super accurate. They express things in different ways. They have different cultural ideas, different concepts, different systems, but they're all tracking the same great wars that happened, in the skies before this planet became fully habited, like the ancient history of our solar system. It's really fascinating stuff. The Lost Book of Enki is a really great resource for studying the beginning of our solar system. If you YouTube search 1.1 Tiamat, it's just a whole video series. It's like 9 videos that track the origin story, the most ancient document, clay tablets from Sumeria on this planet, that is echoed through the Hindu culture, through ancient Greek culture, through the ancient Egyptian culture. Everybody, basically says the same thing with different names, and is still being practiced through modern Christianity. All the same stories. They've been, twisted a little bit and changed a little bit here and there, but they can all be traced back to the same origin story. So anyways, because of all this, because it's light and dark, consciousness, unconsciousness, the difference between right and wrong becomes very difficult. There's morality, there's doing the right thing. That's definitely important. There's respect, allowing for proper situations of respect, but there's not so much right and wrong as there are more and less consciousness, more or less accurate. So someone who is holding on to a belief that has a low degree of accuracy might be accurate only in a few very select ways, in a few very simple simple dimensions, whereas someone who has much more accuracy, their version of truth might be real in many more dimensions to more degrees. So it's the degree, the volume at which it's accurate, and the ways that it's applicable. So the most often we have when people have disagreements is because two people are just holding on to different truths and they're not curious. So the way we deal with arguments is we have curiosity. We say, okay, relativity is a thing. The sun doesn't experience light and darkness. The sun is just light, but our planet experiences light and darkness. They're both true. The sun is right and the earth is right. So every person is right in some way. People that have very little awareness of self and thus very little awareness of other tend to have very little awareness, and so their version of truth tends to be very, very limited. And if we're not able, empathy allows us to see the truth that other people have, because we literally allow us to experience what other people are experiencing. So empathy is like, there's imaginative empathy, where we imagine what other people are going through, and that's really important. And then there's tangible empathy, which is literally feeling what other people are feeling. I believe that everybody is psychic and empathic, but to different degrees and at different levels of awakening within that. And there's so much suppression. There's so much belief system suppression around it. There's so much toxicity. They found certain chemicals that are really destructive to higher states of consciousness. Chronic inflammation and irritation can be a source of distraction, so we never are able to reach a calm, still state. We're able to empathize. It's hard for us to experience what other people are going through in a meaningful way if our own experience is so intense and derogatory and uncomfortable that we can't, open up to that experience. So becoming addicted to foods and drinks which make our bodies feel uncomfortable all the time is a great way to destroy empathy. It's a great example of the matrix of control systems of only making food readily available that will make us feel sick. That way we're feeling sick all the time. We consider that normal. We consider anybody who feels okay to be weird and strange, and we try to tear them down or worship them, when in reality, like, humans don't really need food. Food is a learned condition. Can be unlearned. Food serves an emotional. There's a simple relationship between emotion and food, and basically any emotion that we're not able to fully resolve because our alchemy skills or self-study skills aren't like masterful, ends up as food, as a desire for food. Because when we have no emotional desire, we have no desire for food. Really, it's eating is a habit. When we have toxicity from emotion, we have a negative emotion and it gets held. We don't release it fully. It's stored in our body. It's stored in our electrical system, and then it transfers into more of our biology, and stores in organs and the digestive system often. So we are able to physically move food through our digestive system and release it, because these are held emotions. And so the more we become, if we're in process, like I've gone into process with my emotions totality for a day or two at a time, if we're in this process, I don't really feel compelled to eat. The only time I feel the need to eat is when I feel a toxic overload somewhere. I'm like, oh, well, I still have some toxicity I need to push through my system, so I need to eat some alkaline food that's going to balance me out. And then I'm not eating for comfort or emotion at this point. I'm more conscious eating. I'm eating to solve a problem and say, okay, I need a little bit of mass to move through my system to push this blockage that's here, and I want it to be alkaline, I want it to be nutrient rich, so my body's really benefiting from it as I'm doing it. So we're basically able to expand our consciousness at any point we want to. This is the best practice to have if we're ever looking for information, if we ever don't know why, if we're asking ourselves why ever, if there's ever a wonder of why. This is a great time just to expand our consciousness, just to breathe into it, to not force, not look outside, but to look inside and get very studious and analytical. Okay, what is everything that happened to me in 24 hours? Now, what of these things have not happened to me regularly every 24 hours? And how do these individual events that are slightly unusual, how do they make me feel? What was a feeling that I had that was more intense than it was usually today? Where did that? So essentially just diving in and exploring. And if we feel the need to have an overwhelming emotion, that's perfectly fine, hopefully in private. And the idea is just to keep going and explore, and it's an open book. Put a bookmark in. It's never done. We can get to the point where we release something to the point where it's not a problem, and we can be actively releasing it as it comes up anymore. So that's the equivalent of done, is when we built a mechanism to deal with it, and we're conscious within that mechanism. So, for example, I'm self-critiquing myself almost all the time. and I'm making little judgment calls about what's going on constantly to see, am I saying too much? Am I overreaching my boundaries about something, or am I not being curious enough? If there's something that I need to know that I can learn from being more curious, or being too curious. Oftentimes curiosity can be a problem, because if we're curious about something we shouldn't be, we're inviting more of it. So if we're like, oh, well, this isn't quite working for me and I want to know why, sometimes continuing to be curious about something that isn't working just creates more of what isn't working. So being curious about solutions, this is my big thing, is creating solutions. There's no need to dive into a problem when we can create a solution. Sometimes we do need to touch on the problem to create the solution. To a reference point, we need to say, okay, this is what's not working, this is how we're going to fix it. Sometimes if we just say this is what's going to fix it, it doesn't have the context. But very rarely do we need to state the problem more than for a few seconds at a time. So I'm really, really focused on giving rich context, so that it doesn't need to be curiosity. If I can explore something and see its dynamic in depth enough that I can kind of give a picture of it and say, okay, this is why curiosity is not needed. If there's so much success right now. We can really just be creating success and focusing on success and encouraging everybody to do the same, to say we don't need to, we no longer need to complain about our problems. We no longer need to, at the end of our day, off-gas all our problems. We can instead create the solutions. We can identify one thing that was troubling us the most and spend all of our attention not on ranting and raving and trying to let go through externalized practices, but just focus on that one thing and say, hey, where's my solution coming from this? This is an impossible problem. Where's my solution going to come? And just ask that question over and over again. Direct manifestation is something that happens when we really want something really badly and we decide we need to make it happen and we don't know how it's going to happen, and then we just make it happen. Often we like deciding the night before, the day before, and then sleeping on it and then launching into it the next day is really effective, because the creative process of waking up is really potent. And so if we go to bed with a belief and we wake up with that belief, then we're just like we're in a dream state around it. We've made it into a certain level of reality already by taking it seriously as we go to bed and taking it seriously as we wake up. And I experienced getting support that I don't know where it came from. I've been given skills. I've been, saying, hey, I have a problem. I need to solve this. Wake up the next day, go deal with it. I have no idea how I'm going to deal with it. I have no basis other than I'm going to be really present and I'm going to be, focused on the solution. And things just work out. When we're in a dream state, when we're in a meditative state, we have access to both our extended capabilities, our memories, and our ability to soak up minutia, but we also open ourselves up to the Akashic record, where we can literally be reading other people's thoughts. We can see context. We can gain information from context that we wouldn't normally have gotten. And just read, like I've had my higher self just embody me in certain moments where like, oh yeah, you don't quite have the skills to do. I'm just going to step down and take over for you right here and make this happen because you want this really badly. You're not quite ready to do it, but you're close enough. I'm just going to make it happen. So I've learned from my past, wow, I did that. Okay, how did I do that? I need to study how I did that because I didn't feel like I was fully doing that. Like I wanted it, but I didn't know I was fully doing it. So direct manifestation is this practice of when our true needs are really deep and genuine. They're not just like I want something, but when we really need it and we consciously decide we really need it and say this is more important than anything else. This is when things happen. And there's all kinds of metaphors and stories about this in different ways, but this is how I've experienced it. When it's a true deep need, it's not how much I talk about it or think about it or write it down. I mean, it's great to bring it into a reality by planning and by action and by keeping our consciousness, but it's deep desire, deep need seems to where this comes from. Needs for our spirit that are then recognized by the rest of our being. So they're not just in an etheric realm. They're like, yeah, my mind, my emotions believe this, my practical actions believe this. This is the whatever manifestation that people talk about. I try to avoid that word because it's misused so much. But I encourage everybody to focus on what they love, create space for what they love, decide where boundaries need to be, limit the things that we don't love, and expand into space for more of what we love. All right, have a wonderful morning.